Broadcasting from the old railway depot in Swamp Poodle, Washington, D.C., this is Iraq Matters, a podcast of news, ideas, and conversations about Iraq. This is Eric, and I am really excited about today's program. We have two great interviews, one coming straight from the field. But before I get into that, let me introduce our two special guests. They are the ones that actually did those interviews. So let me introduce Alec, who is an intern here at EPIC. He is contributing to our research for the Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor. Alec, it's great to have you.
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm happy to be here and excited to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing.
And I'd also like to introduce Ahmed Ali. He's our Senior Visiting Fellow and the director of that very program. Ahmed, it's great to have you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and we're excited to talk about the Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, and also released our exclusive interview with the KRG Minister of Planning, Ali Sindi.
You're just back from Iraq, right?
I am back from Iraq, and we conducted field research on the situation of IDPs and refugees in Iraqi Kurdistan, yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn things over to you guys now. Tell us a little bit about this new project.
Well, we have an exciting project that has been ongoing now for about 2 months. It's called the Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, and through it what we try to do is continue to inform the public about the situation in Iraq from a security perspective, of course, because that is the dominant trend in Iraq, but also inform the public and inform opinion makers about the humanitarian situation that is the consequence of the security development. And I'm delighted that we have been able to release continuously for the last 2 months, and a great deal of credit has to go to Alec and Jonathan for their wonderful work to monitor Iraqi media, because that's where we get our news from. We don't get it from Western media, and for their work in conveying to the world the challenges that Iraq faces today. So with that, I think it's important to let Alec talk about the project as well, and why it is important for him, particularly because he's a very promising college student who follows world affairs and interacts with students who are interested in world affairs. So Alec, why is ISHM important in your opinion?
Thank you, Ahmed. I would say ISHM is important not only in my opinion, but I think in the opinion of all students who study the Middle East and international relations in general. It's a very specific, detailed report, but it's quick and concise, and it really allows students like me and students around the world, but also professionals in the field of organizations that are helping to change the situation on the ground, to know what's going on the ground, and that's what kind of pushes not only myself but also Jonathan to be very specific in our reports, to make sure we're getting the details correctly, the locations, the days, the people involved. These are all things that are extremely important to people who study the Middle East, and then also people who are directly involved on the ground in Iraq. And so for us, it's been a real pleasure to really get involved.
It's also amazing. I mean, nine issues now, and as people are listening to this podcast, the 10th one is going to be released this Friday. It comes out every week, every Friday, and you're often getting information through these monitor reports before it ever hits the English language media. So congrats, you guys are doing an amazing job with the project. So Ahmed, why don't you frame things for this first interview that we have to share with our listeners?
Certainly, Eric. We had the opportunity to exclusively interview Minister Ali Sindi, who is the Minister of Planning in the Kurdistan Regional Government, and he's also the head of KRG committee that handles IDPs and refugee affairs in the region. Therefore, he's involved in a daily way in the affairs of the IDPs and refugees. And throughout the interview, you will find out that the crisis of IDPs and refugees has not ended. It has continued, and it is likely to even get worse when the operation to clear Mosul will commence.
Because they're expecting another wave of displacement?
According to some officials from Mosul, there might be 750,000 more IDPs as a result of the possible Mosul operation. Therefore, listening to Minister Sindi, you will understand the challenges facing the IDPs and refugees in the region now, especially the financial challenge of the KRG and the financial challenge for the IDPs themselves. And moving forward, the difficulty of hosting hundreds of thousands of more possible IDPs.
Yeah, because it's such a huge burden already. I mean, already it's over 3.5 million IDPs total. Of that, 2.5 million who have just been displaced over the past year. So that is quite a burden.
One thing to also mention to our listeners is more field research that I conducted along with the Erbil-based journalist Cathy Otten, where we went to the city of Shaklawa, which is near Erbil, the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan, and we interviewed and talked to Iraqi IDPs from Anbar province in western Iraq, and those families have been displaced for over a year now, exactly since January 2014. So the crisis of IDPs and refugees continue in Iraq.
Yeah, and a crisis that's been going on for well over a year now.
Exactly, and even though the press has forgotten about it, the people who are living it every day are still suffering, and they're still in need of a great deal of support from the international community, from us here in Washington, and certainly from national and local authorities in Iraq.
Excellent. So let's go straight to that interview with Minister Ali Sindi.
Minister Sindi, thank you very much for hosting us in your office in Erbil. We're delighted to be with you. EPIC as an organization does a lot of relief work in Iraq and is very concerned and follows the situation very closely with regards to the IDPs and refugees. My first question to you is, can you explain what the Minister of Planning does with regards to the IDPs and refugees?
We have a mission mandated by our Prime Minister, Mr. Nishivan Barzani, who set up high committee for need assessment in relation to the current crisis. It is led by myself, and it's a ministerial committee, and also the three governors of Doha, Erbil, Suleimani are members, plus Minister of Construction, Minister of Health, and Minister of Trade, who is in charge of food issues. So since the beginning, we are continuing now doing the job of these need assessments, and we coordinate with the United Nations agencies, some of the international donor communities, representatives here, consulates or embassies in Iraq, and consulates in Erbil. So basically, in the beginning, we started to look at the main sectors, which were at that time mainly food, water, shelters, health, and also security of the communities. Later on, it changed to much more of resilience. So now there are other sectors which has been added, like education, but also some of the psychosocial issues of these communities, plus then the sustainability of access to services, basic services like electricity, clean water, hygiene, and of course, having that said, doesn't mean that we have an easy task or it is to an extent organized, at least compared to the rest of Iraq, and also compared to the situation in other countries who are hosting refugees, mainly Syrian refugees in this case. So as the crisis has begun by the beginning of June 2014, since then until now, where we are talking about a period of almost 9 months, and today we are still dealing with the issue. We are handling a group of around 1.5 million, assessing their situation. And also, while looking forward, we are still not sure if there will not be more waves of Iraqi IDPs and Syrian refugees that would head towards Kurdistan, which is a very big fear for us, because so far the population of Kurdistan has increased by a percentage of 28%. Mostly from arrived in the year of 2014, around 1 million. 250,000 Syrian refugees started to come in 2012, plus another 250,000 Iraqi IDPs from all the previous years who have moved to Kurdistan. Now these 1.5 million are sharing with the host community all the limited resources and subsidized services, and also competing with the host community on job opportunities and many other things. Nowadays, to make a long story short, we have three main crises. One of them is the war with this terrorist group, with Daesh. The second one is the number of IDPs and refugees. arrived in Kurdistan, and the third issue is the cut of the budget of Kurdistan regional government by the federal government in Baghdad since February 2014, which has led to a financial crisis.
And you mentioned the number of refugees and IDPs, which is very high. What kind of pressure has this number put on the infrastructure here in the region and for the government, particularly in the absence of financial support from Baghdad?
It's a huge burden. The host community, which has been very amazing in helping those people who are in need, in the beginnings of the crisis, they did most of the job because KRG, as mentioned, was short of funding even in June 2014. United Nations programs and agencies were using a donation by Saudi Arabia, which was provided earlier in 2014. An amount of $500 million were spent all over Iraq, and so part of it was used in Kurdistan region. Now, since the beginning, there have been pressure on the infrastructure, which is quite overstretched, but then also on the services. When it comes to services, in the beginning, of course, the host community was very generous. But as the host community is passing through this financial crisis, so over a period of time, they got exhausted. So that has made an end to the efforts and generosity that they were providing. Because today, the government employees in Kurdistan region of around 5 million who are making a big portion of the workforce, up to 46% of the workforce is government employee. They are not paid as of December, so it's almost 3 months now. And this includes also the Peshmerga forces who are on the front lines doing the job, fighting ISIS on behalf of the international community. So the main challenges which remain here is funding both to the government to help the IDP refugees, also pay salaries to the host community to help the IDP and refugees, and third, funding of the United Nations agencies, which are now short of funding, an amount of $1.5 billion. And they have made an appeal, and so far, I think the only country who has responded is Japan by giving $90 million out of the $1.5 billion which they have requested. So if we want to summarize this, first of all, KRG needs its budget, which is from Baghdad, which is around $1.2 billion, so it can help the host community, the regular life and the regular businesses to run, so the host community be stronger to help. The second need is an assessment of specifically of the IDP refugee communities, which is done by the team of World Bank and Ministry of Planning, which is called the Asia Report, conducted over November, December 2014 and released on the 12th of February in Erbil, which mentions very clearly the specific needs of these two communities, the IDPs and refugees, to be another $1.4 billion to be funded or injected into the KRG budget directly, because not everything can be handled by the United Nations agencies. They might be helpful during the crisis, but when it becomes a chronic problem, then it is a problem for the government. So 1.5 billion is the need for the UNs, 1.4 million is an additional budget for KRG, then the third one is the budget of KRG itself that should come from Baghdad, which is around, according to the budget law of 2015, is around 16 trillion Iraqi dinars, which makes roughly probably 13 point something billion dollars.
Minister, when you look at the international response to the IDP and the refugee crisis in Iraq and in Kurdistan in particular, what is your assessment of the response?
The international community so far, or at the beginning of the crisis, they had funding. So then there, of course, the money was not a big issue, but performance was an issue, because it was a very big shock and a surprise for everybody, also for the UNs. Some agencies did well, some did not. Then by time also there have been learning lessons, things got improved. Now there is a better analysis and understanding of the situation, and especially with OCHA coming on board in Kurdistan arriving, things are improving in terms of performance. Of course, United Nations has not been a perfect program anywhere around the world. There are always weaknesses, but basically because they handle some unusual situations, which makes it a big challenge. Now they are in a better status in terms of performance, but they are very bad now in terms of funding. They are under a big threat. For example, the WFP food provision program is under a big threat by end of April, and it might stop. And if this happens, it will be a very big issue.
Mr. Sindi, one of the main challenges of explaining and conveying the magnitude of the IDP and refugee crisis in Iraqi Kurdistan is that it has become an old story for the media. The media does not pay attention to it anymore. Can you tell us what will be the consequences of not caring about the IDP crisis, the refugee crisis, for the region and for the IDPs themselves?
I think there will be a direct threat to the stability of the region, because handling 1.5 million, a population of 1.5 million, is a big issue, not only for Kurdistan regional government, but also for any government around the world. And then if you be more specific, Kurdistan is we have other challenges, other normal challenges. We have shortage in infrastructure. We have issues with Baghdad, which are unsolved. We have the war with Daesh. So if this ignorance of the problem in Kurdistan continues, or because the donor communities have other priorities like Ebola or something else, so it is not always that this is in the news, then I believe stability of Kurdistan is one of the main issues, because to keep Kurdistan prosperous, people of Kurdistan are doing their best. Security of Kurdistan and security agencies are doing their best, the police and everybody. But then when it continues, when you have high poverty rates, when you have high and increasing unemployment rates among them, especially that even the young generation of IDPs and refugees are not taken care of properly, for example, education-wise. Around 70% of the Syrian refugee school-age group are not enrolled in any education program. And around 30% of the IDP school-age groups are not enrolled in any education program at this moment. And the capacity of the education system in Kurdistan region, which has opened its doors to those age group population, is already short. Before the crisis, we had a shortage of around 2,000 schools, buildings for the host community. So how come, if you compare this extra burden, and obviously we have some clear-cut plans, especially in coordination with OCHA, and we know what we want, and that is why we have developed the first immediate response plan, which was the first 3 months, and then we released the second IRP, and now we are revising the strategic response plan for the year 2015. We have the Asia report, which I would like you to have a look at, which clarifies all the needs, and we have also the 3RP for Syrian refugees for the year 2015. Basically to say that we are not confused, and we have a very clear vision, and we know how big the problem is. But the main issue which is pending is money and funding. And money is neither coming from Baghdad nor coming from the international community. Of course, in terms of the aid that was provided by the international community directly through the NGOs or through the United Nations agencies, that has helped in the past. But so far, no single penny or dollar has been in cash paid or given to KRG in order to help KRG help others.
Thank you very much, Minister. One of the big questions that is going to take place and one of the big challenges is the military operation in Mosul. And according to some estimates, there might be at least 750,000 more IDPs as a result of that operation. Do you assess that the region is ready and capable of receiving 750,000 more IDPs and refugees given the existing stress on the infrastructure?
No, KRG is not ready.
What can the international do to ensure that the KRG can be ready in that circumstance?
There are lots of things that international community should do, and number one is the issue of funding. I mean, as mentioned and clarified earlier, even right now there is a big gap in terms of funding for these 1.5 million.
Is it 1.5 million refugees?
Yes, refugees and IDPs. 1.250 IDPs and almost 250,000 Syrian refugees. So if we talk about, of course, we are aware that this possibility is there. But to make a long story short, KRG will not be able to handle it, number one. And number two, it needs a big international effort and program and preparation, which is not happening. And we have been raising this issue with our international partners on regular basis that please consider this properly. KRG has opened door in the past for people who needed help, being them Kurds, Arabs, Christians particularly, and Yazidis. And there have been no discrimination in receiving people. Of course, sometimes there are threats by the terrorist groups who might infiltrate, but apart from that, and regardless of the ethnicity, religion, whatever else, people have arrived. But now the glass is full. So this is an issue now. How specifically the international community can help, number one is money, that is clear. And number two is also know-how and capacity of the organizations that are on the ground now helping. They are basically what is mostly done by the internationals, both United Nations agencies, but also NGOs, local and international, is now focusing on around 20% of the numbers that I mentioned in terms of population. And they are those who are in around 28 IDP and refugee camps. And there are still another number, quite significant proportion, who do not have even access to the IDP refugee camps, because the camps are not able to receive, I mean, it's not just an open door or open space. And the other, probably another 60% are diffused in the host communities, either hosted by families or are in rentals or living with relatives. So now when those people come, starting from the very basic things, if there will be new waves, there will be problems with food, with water, shelters, and very, very basic and simple things. And plus, security-wise also, it will be quite difficult to control more people to come. Right now we are trying to do a comprehensive registration for all these people who have arrived, because we did not have time to do that. Now if more people come, this will become a very big issue, even information-wise. And add to that these people who come, even those who are here, most of them have no money in their pockets. So it's not all about food and water or a tent. I mean, for their normal lives, they need to be, there should be a clear-cut program to cover them. In Baghdad, there is, in the Iraqi budget law, it has mentioned an amount of money to be given to families, but that program has not succeeded. And now it is March. So there are families who have not been paid even $1 for the last 6 or 7 months. So more people to come would be a big threat on the stability. And as I mentioned, the average increase in the population is around 28%, but in some instances, geographical areas, the increase is 100%. So in the governorate of Duhok, overall, the increase in the population is around 80%. In specific districts like Zakho, it is 100% increase in the population. So there is shortage of electricity, clean water, water management system, solid waste management system, and now these are all the basic things. If it comes to education and health, then the situation is much more complicated.
Minister, zor spas. Thank you very much, Minister, for hosting us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for you.
So that was Ahmed interviewing Minister Ali Sindi right there in his office in Erbil. Great interview. I thought it was interesting when the topic of discrimination came up, he kind of sidestepped that. But as I understand it, according to his jurisdiction, he covers humanitarian affairs, and issues of who gets past checkpoints would be more of the affairs of the ASAYESH. Is that correct? The security branch of the KRG?
Well, I think the KRG is managing and facing a major security crisis as well. And these reports of difficulties of getting into Erbil are widely covered. However, what I observed is that there is a dilemma facing the KRG in particular about what to do with the influx of people, because it is difficult to assess who needs help and who doesn't need help, particularly with the way ISIS works, because we know ISIS takes advantage of such conditions to infiltrate areas. So it's a major problem, but I know overall the KRG and the people of Iraqi Kurdistan have been generous in their support, but as we know, this is a new dynamic in the region. You're talking about an influx of a high number of refugees and IDPs that will be challenging even for us here in Washington D.C. I think it will be challenging for under any kind of circumstances. So the region and the government are still adapting to that reality of having to host over 1 million people.
I mean, it makes me think of just the influx of young people and families coming from Central America and Mexico, where that became an issue recently here. That's like a tiny fraction of the numbers that we're talking about that the Kurdistan region is having to host, as well as other parts of Iraq. But I think the fact that there is an issue that not everybody can get into the KRI speaks to the need for a whole of Iraq approach to the crisis. You have to support and assist those IDPs no matter where they are. And I think in the KRI they might be hosting about 47% or so of those IDPs. The rest of the IDPs are elsewhere. They're on the other side of the checkpoint, so they're in the south or in the center of Iraq.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
So let's go into the next interview. Tell us a little bit about who you talked with and what made it an interesting conversation.
So I had the pleasure of talking with Joel Wing, who is the author of Musings on Iraq. It's a great blog about what's going on in Iraq, current developments. But what Joel and I really talked about was looking to the future and kind of seeing what's going to be happening on the ground with the security forces, where they're going to be looking to next, and sort of what we can expect in these next coming months in Iraq. And that relates to what's going to be happening with the IDP crisis, which we'll be watching closely with Isham. And I think it's going to be an important time for us to be paying attention. This is sort of the biggest challenge that Iraq is facing in its modern history, and I think that we need to stay on top of what's going on.
Excellent. So let's go straight to that interview with Joel Wing of Musings on Iraq.
Hi, Joel. Thank you for joining us today on the Iraq Matters podcast. I want to start with this question. I think it's on everybody's mind right now, and it's what's going on in Salahuddin. As you know, the offensive picked up speed pretty quickly, and then it stalled when security forces entered Tikrit. So, first question is, what are the next phases of the operation? There are rumors that the United States might start conducting airstrikes in support of that operation. So is this a good thing? And do you think that Iraqi security forces and the Shia militias and also the Sunni tribal forces that are fighting in this operation are going to be able to clear the province entirely of ISIS without that airstrike support?
Yeah, so like you said, about the end of the second week of March, they had a pause in the operation. And it seems like you have different parties, you have all these different groups involved in the operation, they have big differences about how to proceed. So on the one hand, you have Iran, and you have different Hashad groups that are aligned with Iran, like the Badr organization and others, who basically, I think, came up with the main plans for taking Tikrit and central Salahuddin, and they really wanted to prove that they could carry a large operation, be successful without the United States being involved. So they were really open on social media and other things about how this is Iranian-backed, and, all these people are advising them, and Hezbollah is in there too from Lebanon, and all these different pro-Iranian groups are involved. And so they basically planned it, and then the government came in second, and now they ran into some problems, and now you have a big debate with, I think, the Iranian and some of the pro-Iranian groups do not want the United States to come in, and I think the Iraqi security forces and the Prime Minister Abadi would like the United States to help them out to finish off the operation. So there's a lot of arguments going on. So the head of the Salahuddin Operation Command, for example, said that the Defense Ministry should put in official request for U.S. and coalition airstrikes. And then the head of the Badr organization, Amiri, said only weaklings need the United States help. So you have this whole verbal dispute and argument going over because, like I said, it was basically the plan of Iran and some of their friends to carry out this whole operation without the United States' help. And now that they've run into some difficulties clearing out all the IED fields and going into the urban center of the city, there's this big debate over what's going to happen. So they need to resolve those differences. And once that's done, they're going to be able to take Tikrit. Like you said, the bigger problem is whether they're going to be able to hold all this territory. It's a large expanse of land. You've got all these different places, urban center where they're going to have to spread out a lot of forces. And the problem that's happened in lots of places in Iraq, not just in Salahuddin province, is that once there's a big security operation, a lot of times the militias, the Hashad forces and the security forces just don't have the manpower just to keep those places. They move on to the next operation and insurgents able to reinfiltrate. So that's a big question of how much they're willing to stay in this area because they want to move on, obviously, to Mosul and places like Anbar. So it's a big question about what's going to happen next after these differences are resolved.
Speaking of Mosul and Anbar, in addition to this operation in Salahuddin, the Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga, and also, from what I've read, there are Turkmen militias that are operating in Kirkuk right now, trying to clear a large portions of that province of ISIS. And mostly it seems that their focus is going to be on pushing ISIS out of their stronghold in Hawija. So as these operations continue and as ISIS gets pushed further and further north, what kind of pressure does that place on ISIS? Are they going to be able to hold their territory in Hawija? And if not, how quickly do you imagine that they'll be pushed back towards Mosul?
Yeah, so I think this is important for two reasons. First of all, it shows you that the Kurds are willing to cooperate with Baghdad on these large operations, because this operation is in support of Salahuddin. There's a lot of supply routes that go from southern Kirkuk province into central Salahuddin province into Tikrit. So it's really important that they put this pressure on ISIS in this part of the country so the forces can't retreat, they can't supply into Salahuddin. So it's important because before the Kurds have been complaining nonstop about how Baghdad doesn't arm them and they're not paying the Peshmerga and they need more support. And they also talked about how they would only operate in Kurdish areas. So now they've actually left those places and they're going mostly into Sunni Arab parts of Kirkuk. So that's important. The second part is I think clearing out Hawija might be a little more difficult than places like Tikrit. Tikrit is a urban area. You've got a set amount. Southern Kirkuk is more rural. You've got small towns in that whole area, which is always really hard to control because, again, you need a lot of manpower to stay there in these areas and to hold the areas. So it's really important that they do this, coordinate this operation. So you've got the Kurds moving in from the north, and then you've got Hashad forces moving in from the south to try to squeeze ISIS out of Hawija. So I think it's going to be important that they do it. Again, it's another question about whether they're going to hold it. But it is important that Baghdad and Erbil are actually cooperating on this operation.
And you also mentioned earlier that there are some operations going on in Anbar right now, specifically, and I know in Karma, and there are some reports that I read that ISIS is preparing for an assault on Fallujah. So how does that now also play into the Salahuddin operation and the Kirkuk operation? And like you said, there are only so many troops and they're spreading themselves thin already. And so how can they coordinate all these operations at the same time and really put the pressure on ISIS and start pushing them out?
Yeah, Anbar is a classic example of the shortage of men that the Iraqi government has. The Iraqi tribes and the provincial council in Anbar have been complaining for months and months and months about not getting the support from the central government that they need. They want more men, they want more weapons, they want more training. And this has been going on for months and months. And the security force in the tribes simply do not have enough people to hold all the territories. So, for example, there's a big operation going on in Garma right now, which you mentioned. This is the 8th time since Premier Habadi has come into office in September that they've gone through Garma. So they clear it, then they move on to another place. The insurgents re-infiltrate in, they go back in there, they clear it, they leave, move back in, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So Anbar has really been in a situation of stalemate for months and months and months now. I mean, ISIS hasn't had any really big push there since October when they took a city called Hit, which is in the western part. And so you've just seen this back and forth situation in Anbar going on right now. So, I think the situation in Garma will be successful, and then they'll probably move on to another area and they'll have to go back there another time. There's also a lot of fighting going on in the provincial capital, Ramadi, where ISIS has made some gains there, but a lot of the neighborhoods, it's the same thing. They've gone back and forth since December 2013. So it's been over a year where a lot of these areas are just contested. And Baghdad keeps on saying they're interested in supporting Anbar, but it just has not been a priority so far. They're talking about it, but it hasn't really changed. So it's just a real situation of stalemate there and a lot of repeat operations in the same areas.
And so, in your opinion, you think that the main focus of the central government right now, and also the Kurdistan regional government, is going to be on taking back Mosul, and the focus will be less on Anbar?
Yeah, it's all on the northern part of the country. Salahuddin, Nineveh, Kirkuk province, that's the main focus. Because, Anbar was the first province where fighting openly broke out in 2013 December when Maliki decided to shut down the protest sites there. And I think the central government has just decided that there's been so much instability in Anbar for months and months and months, and there really hasn't been a threat to Baghdad from that part of the country, that they can just leave it as is for now and they can deal with it later.
And just to shift a little bit now, you and I have been talking about the security situation, but I want to also focus on the humanitarian situation and what's going on with the populations in these areas, because with these ongoing operations that, last for months at a time, or specifically in Anbar where operations are back and forth and the central government retakes an area and then ISIS comes in and takes it back. So how is that affecting the humanitarian situation in the country, especially the vulnerable populations, women, children, families? And then in northern areas where now the Kurdish Peshmerga are moving into non-Kurdish areas, there are reports, I'm not sure if you saw it, but the recent Human Rights Watch report that came out that implicated the Peshmerga in human rights abuses, not to mention the other militias that are operating in these areas. So I guess it's two different questions. What's the humanitarian situation in Anbar right now? And then also, what's the situation in the northern areas where these operations are ongoing?
Yeah, I think anytime you see an uptick in violence in any part of the country, whether it's Anbar, Salahuddin, or Kirkuk, you just see massive displacement of people. They want to get out of the way of the fighting, so they start leaving those areas. So And just all throughout central Iraq where there's been fighting off and on, or just constantly, you just see a huge amount of people being displaced and moving to other provinces or other areas within the provinces. And this is a huge problem because a lot of the humanitarian organizations, International Organization for Migration is a big group who's working in Iraq, the United Nations, you have all these other groups. They really have not had the resources to deal with all these people. And it's also exacerbated by the fact that the Iraqi government set up a special committee to deal with displacement. You've got a ministry that's in charge of refugees and displacement as well. And there's just been all kinds of charges of corruption within those organizations, stealing money, government officials claiming that they're refugees themselves and collecting money. So you've just got a really, really bad situation where you've got thousands and thousands of people moving from place to place to place, or leaving their home provinces and moving to completely other provinces in the country, and really not receiving a lot of help. There's camps established by the UN and other groups all over this country. There's just, communities who've come out and helped out the displaced as well. It's just not enough resources to help these people. And this is on top of the fact that, Iraq never really settled all the displacement that happened from the last civil war in the 2000s when the Americans were there. I mean, I think before the whole security situation fell apart, there's still almost 1.5 million people who were displaced from the Civil War, the last Civil War, who never went back to their homes. So you're just having another 1 million plus people on top of that already now losing their homes and moving all over the place. In some situations, when the security situation improves, they're able to move back, but a lot of times their homes are destroyed, and there has been sectarian cleansing in some parts of northern Iraq as well, which makes the situation worse because they come back and their homes are destroyed because different groups aligned with the government accuse the locals of being supporters of the insurgency, so they want to get retribution, retaliation on them. So it's just a really bad situation in Iraq for anybody who's displaced right now.
So where do you see the central government needing to focus its efforts in these next few months? As you know, Prime Minister Abadi has now been head of the Iraqi central government for more than 6 months. Has he done a good job so far? And specifically, what does he need to do to improve the reputation of the central government, and what challenges is he going to face in these next few months?
Yeah, so I think Abadi has said everything that really needs to be said in Iraq. He's tried reconciliation. He's talked about abuses with the justice system, the security forces. He's talked about corruption. He's talked about the budget problems the country is facing with the drop in oil prices. The problem is following up on what he says. The Iraqi government is very, very divided and divisive. You've got different ministries controlled by different political parties who don't have the same agendas and don't agree with each other. So it's like herding cats. So, the prime minister can say something. It's getting the bureaucracy and the different ministries and different parties to actually follow up on that. And that's a huge hurdle. And from reports, not everybody is supporting him. I mean, there's a lot of popular support for Abadi, and some political parties really like the change in the atmosphere from Maliki, who was much more divisive. But there's also reports that Maliki is trying to undermine Abadi. He's tried to align himself, for example, with a lot of the militia groups. He's criticized the prime minister, etc. So he's got to deal with problems with his own party as well, not just other ones. So I think the real challenge for the prime minister is to take what he says and turn it into action, which is always the problem in Iraq because you've got so many different groups working at cross purposes. So he said the right things. Following up is always the harder part.
And just to stretch that a little bit further, so do you think that he will be able to follow up? Specifically the oil agreement between Erbil and Baghdad is one example of where he's made this commitment, but now needs to follow through. So do you think that that's still possible?
Yeah, I think the oil agreement, it has a lot of problems. The central government and the Kurdish government are arguing over the details. But I think there's enough leeway in the agreement, and people are being flexible enough. I mean, they're still going to argue. They're going to complain. They're going to talk about the deal's falling apart and we're going to pull out. But it's still stuck together. So I think the two sides have said, we want this agreement. They both need each other. There's mutual need between the two. So they're going to work through these problems. It's not going to be perfect. It never is. But I think that's something that actually seems like it's going to work out in the long term with all the bickering. Other things seems more difficult. So, for example, there's a National Guard bill in Parliament. There's all kinds of divisions about who's going to control that. There's another bill about revising the de-Baathification process in Iraq. Again, all kinds of divisions between political parties about how that's going to work out. Getting the security forces, Abadi talked about having arrest warrants issued and stopping abuses within prisons and things like that. I don't know, that's so ingrained within the Iraqi security forces for decades, even before Saddam Hussein came into power. That's going to be really, really hard to change this institution. So I think you just need to look case by case by case to see how much can really be done at this point.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to really focus in on some of these issues that we've been hearing about and explaining them in a little more detail to us.
Thank you.
Alec, it's great that you're here with me, and Ahmed back from Iraq. It was great to have you guys on today's program.
Thanks for having us.
It was good to be back on Iraq Matters.
That's our show for today. You can always contact us anytime through email. Visit our website. You can get a lot more details. Check out the latest Isham that comes out every Friday. And we would love to hear from you. If you have ideas of stories, please contact us. If you'd like to sponsor our program, please contact us. So this is Eric
and Alec,
Ahmed,
reminding you that Iraq matters.